as long as you are able to develop trust, as long as you're able to develop, good measurement systems where ambiguity is not part of the equation, where everyone knows, what's expected of them, how everyone is being measured, what constitutes, a great performance, then you're able to let people go because everything is clear. I think, there's a lot of talk about when we're working from home, how do you know people are working? It doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, it's clear between the two of you, and you and your staff, you and your team, what constitutes success. If that is unambiguous, there's no other thing to do.
Hey, podcast family, and welcome to episode number 292 of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Beartongue Advisors. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll enjoy our content and become a subscriber. And if you've been listening to us for a while, thank you so much. And it would mean the world to me if you would leave us a rating and review on whatever app you listen to this through. That really does help us grow our audience and reach more leaders, which is our whole goal here at L3 Leadership. So thank you in advance for that. In today's episode, you'll hear my conversation with Leah Lizarondo. For those who may be unfamiliar with Leah, let me just tell you a little bit about her. She co-founded 412 Food Rescue in 2015 and is also the founder and CEO of Food Rescue Hero. Her work in food recovery has been featured in NPR, Fast Company, The Washington Post, Food and Wine, Bust Magazine, and Civil Eats, among others. Leah has won numerous awards, including the Vital Voices Global Leadership Award in 2020 and the We Empower UN SDG Challenge in 2019, which is a global award for women social entrepreneurs. Leah received her graduate degree in public policy and technology from Carnegie Mellon University. She has served as entrepreneur in residence at the Block Center for Technology and Society at Hines College at Carnegie Mellon University, and she was born and raised in the Philippines and currently lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In our conversation, you'll hear Leah talk about the lessons that she's learned from starting and scaling her nonprofit, her advice for organizations looking to utilize technology, specifically apps, her advice on fundraising, leadership, and so much more. You're going to love the conversation, but before we get into that, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Beartongue Advisors. The financial advisors at Beartongue Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Beartongue Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at beartongueadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SPIC. Beartongue Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. And my wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings there, and we just loved our experience. And not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, for every couple that comes into their store engaged, they give them a book to help them prepare for marriage, and we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And with all that being said, let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with Leah Lizarondo. Well, hey, Leah, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview. And why don't we just start off with you just telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Leah Lizarondo, and I am the co-founder and CEO of 412 Food Rescue and the CEO of Food Rescue Hero, which is a technology platform that food rescue organizations like 412 use to facilitate food recovery.
Yeah, and can you just, I certainly want to dive into more of what you do there, but can you just briefly share your story with us?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Philippines. I immigrated to the United States when I was in my 20s and started my career in consumer products for Colgate-Palmolive, then moved on to technology after that. Took a little bit of a break, semi-break. I worked as a food writer for Pittsburgh Magazine while I was raising my kids when they were young. And kind of that responded to my love of food that I could never, realized in my career path. 412 Food Rescue was founded in 2015. After many years of thinking about food waste, in 2012, I read a report by the Natural Resources Defense Council that first talked about how much food we waste, which is up to 40% of our food supply. So 412 Food Rescue and Food Rescue Hero really puts together three of my passions, which is technology and food and social impact. And really my interest in, trying to understand people and, how to, bring out the best in all of us. So that's in a 2-minute spiel, like who I am.
Yeah. And you talked about the three entities kind of coming together, technology, the food industry. Can you talk about how you practically do that and how you deal with the issue of food waste? Because I love what you're doing in our city. We've benefited from it at Light of Life. Can you just talk about what that looks like tactically?
Yeah. So what we do is we're essentially the best and easiest analogy is that we are the DoorDash of food surplus. So what we do is we work with restaurants and grocery stores, universities, events that may have surplus food throughout the day that's perfectly good. And then what we do is we match this surplus food to nonprofits and the individuals that they serve. And then we mobilize, thousands of drivers to move the food from, the food donor to the nonprofits that we partner with, such as Light of Life. And we do this, just like Uber Eats and DoorDash and all of those apps through our own app, which is called Food Rescue Hero. And this app started in Pittsburgh in 2016. And then we started sharing it with other cities in 2018, and it's now in 13 cities.
That's incredible. I do want to hear you talk a little bit about the app. So, specifically in the nonprofit sector, I know a lot of nonprofit leaders, and I think, everyone would think it would be cool to have an app as a nonprofit. But I've seen very few do them well, one of which is you. And so I'm just curious, what did you learn about, creating an app that actually works and is functional and looks beautiful? What did you learn through that process? And what would you tell nonprofit leaders if they're considering doing something similar?
Yeah. So, our app is the way it is because we have such a great team of, technologists and designers and our folks in operations that really inform the design of our app. So all of this team really is working together to make sure that we have an app that is not only useful really, but actually very engaging. And, I'm really beholden to my team on that one. My advice to nonprofits in terms of apps, as you can imagine, I've been asked this many times, we have an idea, should we, create an app? And really, technology in general is, something we will all use, and all nonprofits, should be prepared, if not already, to embrace, technology and how it can make their operations more efficient and scalable. So that's my biggest advice is, what is the role of this app that you're trying to create? Do you really need an app? Could it be a web-based application? Or is it really technology that is causing inertia or bottlenecks in your operations? It's really looking at why you feel like you need an app. Most of the time, I would say you don't need an app. It really, when we look at apps and what they do, for us, it's mission critical. Like we cannot ever do what we do without an app that, pretty much coordinates all of the tens of thousands of rescues that happen every year. In the same way that Uber would never exist in 1980 or, before all of this technology was available, because there's no way to coordinate thousands of drivers. When we didn't have these centralized ways to coordinate fleets, we used to have very disparate and unconnected cab networks. So for better or worse, we are able, big companies are able to coordinate that across multiple countries, right? Which is a scale that, is really, for me, unfathomable, in the earlier days. So when nonprofits, think about apps, there's many ways to look at it. I think one of the things I would like to do in the future is to help nonprofits really figure out, what role technology can play in their organization. And if it's a process, there's many ways to look at it, basically.
Yeah. And, one way that, aside from the app that I think you do a great job of utilizing technology for is data. And so we live in a world where everyone wants data. It's extremely important for nonprofits to be tracking and have data available. And I'm just curious, do you have any advice, or how has technology played a role in the data that you provide to donors, the board, et cetera?
Yeah, so the good thing about having an app or a platform or technology is that one of the first things it can do for you is that it can allow you to access data easier. So if you can imagine, when we didn't have this app, we were coordinating all of our drivers many different ways: email, text, phone calls. Thank God there wasn't faxes, but I mean, all of this data was coming in, from different places and not in real time. So at any single point in time, we really didn't have an idea of what was going on. So centralizing it to this platform allows us to, at any single point in time, really understand what our network looks like. If you ask me, how much food have we recovered, I can just look at data and tell you right now, like how much we've recovered right now. And then we can glean other information that's useful to us. For instance, are we missing a lot of rescues that are out there? And if we are, where are we missing them? So at that point, we can make decisions on, first of all, we don't have enough volunteers. And second of all, we don't have enough volunteers in this area. And then we can further home in on, is it because of a particular donor or a nonprofit, or is the route too long? Is the food too heavy? We can identify these things and troubleshoot really fast. So data is, one of the principal benefits of putting your operations more closely entwined with technology.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. So you obviously started or co-founded this organization. I'm just curious, what have you learned about the art of entrepreneurship and actually starting and then scaling a company?
Yeah, so I think one of the first advice that I give to entrepreneurs is that, do you have a path to funding? A lot of times, great ideas die because it's not funded. It doesn't mean that the idea is bad. It's just that the entrepreneur themselves were not able to shore up enough capacity to actually make it to the next point. So fundraising is all about making it from one point to the next where you can raise more funding or earn enough revenue, right? So founders are constantly trying to get to that next level. And it's that process of staying alive, whether through, philanthropic funding, VC investment, or enough revenue so that you can make it to the next point of growth. And then, using that capacity that you're shoring up each time to build a great team so that you are able to grow to the next point. So founders are really all about capacity, all about the team, and then allowing the team to do their job and do what they're best at, and then providing support so that everyone is able to perform at the highest level and, are able to also find personal fulfillment so that they keep on going and then they keep on challenging themselves, and so that the organization itself keeps on innovating, and then it's kind of like this virtuous cycle.
Yeah, so I've been in fundraising now for almost a decade, and I'd be foolish not to ask. I'm curious, what have you learned about fundraising over the last 5 years?
If you don't ask, the default answer is no.
Come on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fundraiser by trade. This fundraising was a necessity. And I think a lot of the things I hear, and even myself when I was first doing this, was, I hate asking for money. And really, it's not about asking for money. People have the capacity to give. It's all about finding the right match between what your mission is and the person that you're speaking with. And really understanding, and really understanding what's motivating them. What do they want to, what return are they looking for? Whether for philanthropy, obviously it's not, an economic return, but for themselves, what's important to them. And then how does your organization respond to what's important to the person that you're speaking with? So it's about, being able to communicate that and finding a mutual goal that you both invest in.
I absolutely agree 100%. I also, this is a leadership podcast. There's the entrepreneur startup part of what you do. What have you learned about leadership over the last 5 years?
Over the last 5 years. So I think, I know that the biggest thing I've learned is, when we read articles that say it's all about the people. So it's all about the people, and it's all about the people in many different ways. So first and foremost, when we read about a team, and it's all about the team at first, because this is my first organization that I've co-founded and led, that was a pretty abstract thing. And even though I've, supervised other people before, not in this scale. And probably because this is also my first nonprofit, the motivations are beyond economic, although we do, our goal is to, not have that exchange between, a for-profit and a nonprofit. Everyone is just as valuable. So it's really understanding what motivates people. What do they need in order to do their best, or, bring their best selves to work? What flexibilities, what considerations, do we need to understand with each and every individual? It's like, it's really that process. And then, after that, it's trying to understand, how best do they work? And then how much trust, and how do you develop that trust with each other so that you're not, micromanaging, you're not, allowing them to work in their own way. So for me, that has been the biggest learning and the biggest, thing that I try to do, every day with my team is really letting them go. And the moment that I was able to truly do that, I think was a moment for me. One of my biggest, epiphanies is that as long as you are able to develop trust, as long as you're able to develop, good measurement systems where ambiguity is not part of the equation, where everyone knows, what's expected of them, how everyone is being measured, what constitutes, a great performance, then you're able to let people go because everything is clear. And then, there's no thing, there's a lot of talk about, when we're working from home, how do you know people are working? It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, it's clear between the two of you, and you and your staff, you and your team, what constitutes success. And if that is unambiguous, then there's no other thing to do.
So this may be the answer to that, getting clear on expectations, but I am curious, I always like to ask leaders, if you can go back to 2015 and do things differently from a leadership perspective, what would you change that maybe you didn't do right or you would take back?
That is a good question. I really don't think there was any other way to go about it. I think that I needed to go through my own personal process of understanding, what an organization needs, what people need. And I wouldn't change a thing. It's, the growth was both euphoric and painful at the same time. We have, folks that have been with us from day one and, from day, it's the turnover is extremely low. And one of the things I'm super, super proud of is that I would say 95% of the people at our organization were volunteers first.
Wow.
And so for me, so they believed and bought into the mission even before they worked with us. And that's actually what made them want to work with us. So now I have this bias whenever we post a job, is like, I look at whether they are in the app. And have they done a rescue? And if not, why not? Because at this point, 2021, 412 Food Rescue is in the zeitgeist of the city. If you've not, really heard that there is this opportunity to volunteer and have actually, followed through on it, then, I kind of feel a little bit, more hesitant. It's not a deal breaker, but I would say the most successful people at Foreign to Food Rescue volunteered first. And the second, a predictor of success for us is adaptability, because this organization has all the hallmarks of a startup and a tech startup. It's, we have no precedent to follow. We don't have a playbook that we're following. We're not a food pantry in the traditional sense. So we can't just go to other food pantries and say, how did you do this? And just follow the same path. So everything changes and is so variable and so fast as well. So if you're not adaptable and understand kind of the waves of change, and you can kind of like flow with it, then it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, I've done a lot of interviews here on the podcast, and it's interesting. I ask a lot of people. I usually don't ask what you do differently in leadership like I did for you, but I usually say, if you could have coffee with your 20-year-old self, what would you tell them? And it's been interesting how often and how consistent the answer has been, I wouldn't change anything, because I had to go through what I had to go through to learn the lessons that I needed to learn. And like you said, it's both extremely painful and it's euphoric at the same time. And so I just love that answer. And leaders, just if you're listening to this, just enjoy the journey, enjoy where you're at,
yes,
and just grow, because these days go by so fast.
Yeah. And I tell that to my team all the time, even on a daily basis. I mean, this is true longitudinally, like you talked about, if there's anything I would change from 2015 to now. But even on a daily basis, there's, like I was telling you, we have an event tomorrow and it's extremely stressful. So, but it's at the end of the day, it's going to be okay.
Yes.
Just go with it. There will be moments of tightness. And, you'll have that moment of tightness, but after that passes and you've solved it or you've talked about it, let go, because there's really nothing you can do, right?
Yes.
It's at some point with events, as you reach a stopping point where, it's just going to happen.
Yep. Yeah.
and it's going to happen the way it's going to happen. There's nothing we can do at this point. Let's just enjoy the process.
Yes. I'm with you 100% on events. We were talking a little bit earlier on the leadership end too. Now you're at a point where you're starting to scale. You mentioned how, the app is now being used in 13 different cities. And, a lot of startups or a lot of organizations would love to move beyond their local region and influence. And I'm just curious, what are you learning? And I'm sure it's a messy learning curve, just expanding, but what are you learning when it comes to scaling beyond your city into other cities?
Yeah, so that's so interesting. Another, interesting thing, because, 412 Food Rescue right now is at a stage where, we've reached a point where we've defined our process and it's all about growth now and getting more of the same thing. But in terms of partnering with other cities or other nonprofits in other cities to work with the app, we're still in the baby stages. And one of the most important things is to understand that nonprofits have a sense of agency, and we are not, they are licensing our app, but there's no ownership or, a superseding of their own operations. The app is there in their service. It's understanding that and making sure, again, the trust between the two organizations is present and that we are there for them, but also the openness to understand that this app was designed to work in a certain way. So I like making analogies to, Microsoft Word or Salesforce. Like, it was designed a certain way. The people who designed it, have this path that they're thinking everyone will go. But as the platform and the technology or the tool gets more complicated, people we use Word differently. We use Salesforce differently. And for us, it's also letting go of our own process or our own way that we think, people should use it. So it's a very interesting learning curve as well, but it's really fun and fulfilling to work with other nonprofits in other cities that are working with the same mission.
Yeah, well, keep up the great work there. I want to talk a little bit about your personal leadership journey. This is my opinion, but I think you've done a great job of building a personal brand on top of, the work that you do. And there's actually a lot of research now pointing to when leaders who have a personal brand are leading organizations, there's a lot more trust built into that organization because people trust the leader that has the personal brand. And I'm just curious, have you intentionally built your brand? Do you have any advice for leaders out there building their brand as they lead their organizations?
I don't think I set out to build a personal brand. I think one of the things that the other best piece of advice that I've received, which I think is true, is, when investors invest, they don't just invest in the idea, they're investing in the leader.
Yes.
And, one of the things that I try to communicate to our funders is that I am going to take your investment. I'm going to take your belief in the mission, and I will deliver. So that's the sense that I want to give our funders, is that I want you to have confidence in me, because you put your trust in this mission. I want you have confidence in me that I will take that, really deliver on the promise.
Yeah.
So that sense of confidence is what I want to communicate right out the door. The second thing is, I think one of the things that's important to me is, as a person of color, as a woman, as an immigrant, as a minority, the reason why I want to be out there in certain ways is that, for me, I don't have an example, especially in Pittsburgh. It's very difficult for me to find someone who looks like me. And if there's a position I want to take, if there's a reason why I talk a little bit more, I use the platform a little bit more to be able to have a voice, is that I want people who are like me, who are, women, immigrants, person of color, minorities, to see that, yes, it can happen. You have an idea, you can bring it to fruition. You will have the support. And I actually myself personally am there for you if you want my support, if you feel like I have something valuable to impart. So that's one of the biggest reasons. And I really felt that, a few months ago when, violence against Asian Americans were on the rise. And I wanted to show something positive, and that, that immigrants, Asians in particular, are not there to take that, that this image of minorities or immigrants as something to be feared is really something that we need to take out of our society, of our community. So that I appreciated. But really, at the end of the day, it's about the work. And I think a challenge for leaders that do attach themselves to the brand too much, and it is a challenge that I am feeling, is that I don't want it to be that, right? I want it to stand on its own. And it does. But more and more, I think that while it was propelled a little bit by that, it was propelled a little bit by me wanting to also prove that, I have an immigrant chip on my shoulder, right? That we can do it, that we can, rise above what we feel are barriers, was very important to me.
Yeah, I'm curious what you would say to leaders who may not be a minority, may not be an immigrant. How can we be part of the solution? Obviously, this has been front and center of our culture for the last year and a half. I'm just curious, if you could challenge leaders who aren't a minority on how they can really stand up and speak for those and empower those who may not have a voice, what would your advice be to them?
I think my biggest advice is that, talking about diversity, talking about that is important, but obviously not enough. And there's many, more organizations and individuals that are much better than me in terms of understanding and talking about what are the strategies that work. So one of the things I was talking to a friend, well, first of all, you're not saving anyone, right? So don't even try to approach the problem in that way. Second of all, if you're trying to serve a population, make sure that that population is represented in how you design, that they have a voice in, what you're going to do, because you don't know, what the people you are trying to serve are going through unless you are one of them. Right. So for us, when we talk about our work, and, I see this term a lot, and I take a lot of umbrage sometimes in the way it's being used, is, human-centered design. Like, what does that mean? How do you walk as close as possible in people's shoes so that you're actually understanding what works and what does not? The third is, there are deliberate things you need to do, so there are studies that have shown that the way job descriptions are written can be biased towards, male candidates. And there's, formulas now where there's people now that can look at a job description and neutralize some of that. Making sure that you have a pool that's equal. If you want to increase, female leadership, then start building that pipeline deliberately. Or when you're accepting resumes, make sure it's at least half, not, when you're accepting resumes and only advancing like 30% women, then you're already penalized from the very beginning. So there's a lot more out there that I'm not the expert on, but we try to adopt these philosophies at our organization. And even us, we could be better always. And we're striving to be better at that.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. Before we dive into what I call the lightning round, which is a bunch of fun questions I like to ask leaders, I just want to end with hearing you talk a little bit more. I want to hear you talk to leaders who may have a dream. I read an article where you made a statement that I thought was beautiful. You said, when you see opportunities, you cannot unsee them. And can you just talk to people who may see an opportunity to start something, but maybe they're afraid of failure? They don't know where to start. They don't know if it's actually a good idea. What advice would you give to those people?
I see a lot of opportunities and I do unsee some of them, but I think it's mostly about matching what you see with your passion and, how much you believe in it and how much it bothers you, really, right? It's like, so for me, seeing, this food waste happening, the opportunity that I saw was also something that I knew fairly clearly I could do something about. Like, I could see the solution fairly clearly. And at that point, the prospect of failure wasn't even in consideration. It was just, it's like an itch you have to scratch, it's like, this is so clear to me. I have to go through this door. I have to go through it and see if it's, what I'm feeling or what I'm seeing, it actually holds water. And so it would have been more uncomfortable for me to not do it, right? Because it's like, it's just so clear. It's like, it's more uncomfortable to not scratch that itch. Right? So that's what I mean by that. So, there's so much opportunity we see. All of us are armchair problem solvers to a certain extent. It's like, oh, why didn't he do that? Or why didn't he do this? And I try to stop that now that I've done something that I feel like is, like that. And I've seen how hard it is to actually like follow through on something. I never, ever I try my best at the very least to not armchair, problem solve, because I don't know what that, what that organization is going through or, what they're trying to overcome. So that's what I mean by that is when you feel this passion, we're not passionate about everything. We're also not fit to solve all the problems in the world, but we know that there are things we ourselves, are stronger on, or we know a little bit more of, or a little bit more passionate about. And when I say that's what I mean. It's like, just follow through on it, see where it goes.
As before the lightning round, I also just want to give people an opportunity. If they've been listening to this and saying, wow, 412 Food Rescue sounds amazing, I'd love to learn more or be a part of what they're doing, where can people find you?
412foodrescue.org and foodrescuehero.org.
Excellent. We'll include links to all of that in the show notes. So let's dive into the lightning round. You answered this. I don't know if it was just business, so I'll ask it again in case you have a broader answer for life. But what is the best advice you've ever received and who gave it to you?
Best advice, these lightning round questions always stump me. And what I've been saying lately, and this is primarily because of, we just went through COVID, one of the most stressful periods of this era. Do your best. And then on the flip side of that is really be discriminate about what you do, what you choose to do, how you spend your time. So it's do your best, but, pick what you do. So I think that's the best advice I can give and I've received. And what I tell my team, do your best. I think if we are sincere in that, then we can always look at ourselves in the mirror and feel good.
If you could put a quote on a billboard for everyone to read, what would it say?
Oh my God. I would say the best, that's the same thing. I think it's to give ourselves grace and forgiveness too. It's like, so yeah, as a parent, I'm all constantly feeling like I'm failing. Right? And we don't want to disappoint our children. We want to raise, our children in the best possible way, but we're all just doing our best. There's so much guilt during COVID. My son was homeschooling and I was home, but I couldn't really be with him because I was really working, and he couldn't understand that, why can't you be with me? Why are you in the other room? It's just, that whole experience was one of the most stressful times that I've ever gone through as a parent.
Wow. If you're a reader, have you had one or two books that have made a significant impact on your life that you'd recommend?
One or two books. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I would say my favorite book ever is this book by Guy Kawasaki. And he was Apple's chief evangelist. And his book is Enchantment. That's the title. I keep it to this day. And I've moved a couple of times. And when you move, you like prune your books. That book has followed me.
Wow.
And it's really one of the best books I've written on, how to engage in a very sincere way, but also how to catalyze engagement. And I love that book so much. And I think I've given that book away to so many people. I also love Brené Brown's Daring Greatly.
Yes. So
that's a more recent book that I've always, for me, a book that I read before we started it's really to give me that last propelling kind of motivation to just go through with it. And I think the lessons in that are really important. I'm moving on, Chef, and I'm just going to talk about some of the other books here. So there's a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And it's by Ben Horowitz. Core values, I'm not sure I agree fully with everything about it, but there are hard things that we have to do. And especially as you're growing a company or an organization that are not necessarily, the most enjoyable things, but you just have to go through them. So I think that took me through, a lot of the hard stuff. A lot of my more recent reading has been, on being mindful, which sounds so trendy, but it's really what helped me get through COVID. And it's what's helping me kind of navigate this next period that we are all trying to figure out, which is how do we re-enter and what is life now, right?
Yeah. Is there anything that you wish people knew about your journey that they may not know?
I think that one of the things that I'm always passionate about when I talk to other women, which was a big point of self-doubt for me, was, I was, in this path to this, great career, at Fortune 500, and I stopped working. That's always been one of the biggest kind of personal decisions that I've made that have, I would say, divided women, right? Do you opt out? Do you not opt out? Even the term opting out, the term for career women who stop working is opting out, which is it's pejorative in itself. So I always tell women that follow what feels right for you at that time, and you won't regret it. I would never regret, that period in my life where I took a step back from my career and really raised my kids. But it also gave me clarity on what I wanted to do next. Because for me, the the biggest question at that time when I wanted to go back into, full-time work was, what is for me worth the exchange of time with my children? And so that's when I really homed in on, okay, I will work as hard as I did, and I do, but it has to mean something. And for me, that is a worthy exchange of time, right? If I'm not going to be with my kids, at least I believe in what I'm doing enough so that I feel like the exchange is fair. If there's a word to put for it.
Yeah, no, that's so good. Thank you. Do you have a biggest leadership pet peeve?
Biggest leadership pet peeve? You mean that other leaders say?
Yeah, just when you look around at leaders, do you, are there things that they do that just drive you crazy? Whether, it could be treating people poorly, I don't know what your experience is.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's, treating people like, wholesale. All right. So everyone is an individual, and while you can have, general strategies, it's really all about understanding each and every one of them. Which is also why it's important for leaders to be able to create, a structure where they're not overseeing everyone, because you can't focus on each and every one of them. So that's my biggest struggle, is making sure that I only have, enough people that I directly interface with, so that I can actually work with them directly as a whole self. Because when you have, 15 people that are directly reporting to you, there's no way you can really focus on that person. And when at the moment that I'm feeling that pain of not being able to focus on the individual, not in a work sense, not like, what did you do today? What are you going to do this week? I'm actually the worst micromanager. I'm not a micromanager at all. But really focusing on what are your needs as an individual? Are you feeling stressed out? How can I support you? Are you feeling some roadblocks? And if there is, like, what can I do about it? What are your hopes and dreams? Are you getting that from this organization, or are you not? And I've had honest conversations where it's like, maybe this is not the right fit, but really in a structure of trust and openness, so that conversation is not a negative conversation. I've had conversations that are like, maybe it's not the right time. So really making sure that you have enough capacity to be able to focus on your team is one of the biggest values that I try to hold. And my biggest pet peeve, I guess, are leaders that think of people as commodities.
Last question would be, at the end of your leadership journey, what do you want to be remembered for? What do you want your legacy to be?
Oh, I don't know if it's really my legacy for my work. I think that it's not personally me, but I would love for, the legacy of Food Rescue Hero to be realized, which is for it to exist all over the world, and as a conduit for people to do, micro acts of kindness. That's really the end goal. Food is just the beginning. I think we want to use technology as a pathway to doing good. And, if we're looking at our phones 200 times a day, hopefully one of those times that you look at it will catalyze something that is in service of someone else.
Anything else you want to leave leaders with today?
Where everything starts is trust. And that is the hardest thing. Trust in the process, trust in people, trust in yourself. And cultivating that every day in your entire journey is something that I try to do. And if we try to approach everything with that perspective, then I think we lead better.
Leah, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been rich. I really enjoyed it, and I know it'll add value to everyone who listens to it. And thanks for all the work you do in our city and now beyond. And I'll be joining you in that dream to make that worldwide. That's awesome. Keep up the great work.
Thanks so much, Doug.
Well, hey, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Leah. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with her and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/292. And leader, as always, I want to challenge you that if you want to 10x your growth this year, then you really need to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 5 years, and if you're unfamiliar with what they are, they're simply groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together on a consistent basis for at least 1 year in order to help each other grow to their maximum potential, achieve their goals, hold each other accountable, and to do life together. If you're interested in learning more about mastermind groups, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds. And as always, I like to end every episode with a quote, and today I'll quote Andy Stanley. He said this. He said, "Every decision you make becomes a permanent part of your story. Write a story worth telling." Well, leader, I hope that this episode challenged you. I hope that it inspired you. And I want you to know that Laura and I love you. We believe in you. And don't quit. The world needs you to lead. The world needs you to make the world a better place. So don't quit. Keep making a difference. Keep leading. And we will talk to you next episode.